Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to share with you a glimpse into how I created and built a miniature barn. Like with most of my projects, I start off sketching out my ideas. Once I get everything the way I want it to look, I then transfer it onto craft paper to get a more accurate measurement. In this particular build, my measurements had to be a little bit more accurate than they usually are, because I was designing it around 3 miniature little horses that I had found. For the main structures of this project, you will see me using cardboard, mat board, and also foam board. Using my pattern pieces, I was then able to cut out the shapes that I needed. Once I had all the pieces cut out, I glued them together using Gorilla Wood Glue. Once I get the pieces glued together, then I paint on a mixture of PVA glue and joint compound. I learned this technique by watching Ara over at Bentley House Minis, as well as other miniatures online. It's definitely a great way to create strength within your projects that are not made of wood. The solution ratio is using more glue to a smaller amount of compound and mixing well for a smooth consistency. I personally change the consistency up depending on where I need it in the build. I like to make enough of the mixture to use for an entire project at once, and I store it in an airtight container. Using 1, 2, 3 blocks as you see here to keep my project level, I allow the mixture to dry overnight. This is a very important step before adding any more layers, textures, or paint to the project. After the pieces dried, I couldn't wait to get to the external side of the barn. Wanting it to look like a wooden barn, I used flat wooden stir sticks as my wood strips, and I laid them down in a pattern. After all the wood had dried, I then trimmed off the edges. I wanted a red barn, so I painted the wood with acrylic paint along with a whitewashing effect to bring out some of the details of the wood. At the base of the barn, I wanted a stone look, and I did this by using foam board. I drew on the stones, texturized it, and painted it to get the effect. Of course, my farmer needs a ladder to get up to his hayloft, so at this point I built it, painted it, and did a dry fit. To make the little saddles, I first had to measure the backs of my miniature horses, and then I drew out a pattern on paper. After I got the shape and the size correct, I used old recyclable faux leather purse found at a thrift store as the fabric to make my saddles out of. I made both a Western saddle to go on a paint horse and then a little English saddle that I would be hanging inside the barn. The Western saddle was a little bit tricky because I had to come up with a way to create the back of the seat and the horn to the front of the saddle. I did this by using wood glue and layers to create a 3D effect. I used pieces of wire to create all the little places of the saddle where strips of leather straps would be for the reins and for the stirrups. To make my horse blankets, I used plaid material glued to fabric batten. I was so happy with the way that these little blankets turned out, and of course they look adorable on the back of the little horse. Then it was time to saddle up the paint horse in his new saddle and reins. He is the only horse that will be fully saddled up. The other two will be hanging out in their stalls in the barn. Here I'm making the feed and water buckets, starting by making cone shapes that I glued down onto paper. Once I cut them out, I brushed on wood glue to strengthen the paper, giving it a surface to paint on. I then painted the feed buckets black and the water buckets blue. I added metal handles so that they could hang from the sides of the stalls. Here I have my trim, and some I painted while it was on the barn and some while it was off the barn and then put on. As you see here, I used masking tape to hold the trim on while the glue dried. For some realism, I added tiny seeds to the feed buckets and water inside the water buckets with UV resin and hardened with the UV light. I love working with UV resin and always looking for a way and a reason to put it into one of my projects. At this point, I'm showing how I did my roof for the barn, which was made out of foam board. I added the roof after most of the interior work was done because I knew once it was on, I would be unable to get inside. In this picture, you see a wood beam at the top. This is along the ceiling line, and this is where the lights are that will light up the barn's interior. Once again, I am using my trusty masking tape to hold down all the seams so that they can dry together. I have to be honest here, not all the seams fit properly at this stage, but with the wall paste and glue mixture that I had mentioned earlier, It's a really good way to fill in the gaps of imperfection on a build. To get a metal tin roof onto my barn, I glued down corrugated paper to the foam board. I then used some glue to paint over that paper to strengthen it. Once it was dry, I painted it in a silver metal paint. I then weathered it and aged it just a little bit. To create the saddle racks for hanging and organizing the other saddles and blankets when not in use within the barn, I used wooden dowels which I painted and then distressed. I then glued them to the wall. One of my biggest obstacles for this particular build was how to hide the batteries for my lights within and outside the project. The longer I stared at the battery pack and looked at its shape, it finally came to me. It looked like the shape of a gas pump. And on the farm where I grew up, we actually did have a couple of gas pumps on the property that were used to fill up farm equipment. I love the way that the old gas pump turned out. It was really cute. The top toggle switch turns the lights on and off. The bottom had to be modified, but it lifts up so that you can have access to changing the batteries. My favorite part of any build or project is staging the scene and placing all the items and getting in all the little details to bring out the realism of the project, to truly give it life. Enjoy the last part of the video with a picture montage of the finished look inside and outside of the barn once it was completed. Thank you for visiting me here on my channel. I really appreciate you taking the time to let me share with you my miniature barn build. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing this project and perhaps you even learned something new along the way. I will be making more videos and content, so I hope you will come back and check them out. So please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.